Welcome, everybody. My name is Sebastian, and thank you for joining us today. I'm happy to announce that we have 3 speakers today. With us here is Oscar Cordon. He's a professor at the Faculty of Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence at the University of Granada here in Spain. And he's also part of the 1% of the most cited researchers in the world. We also have here Pablo Mesajo. He's a professor at the same institute, and his research focuses on machine learning, computer vision, and computational intelligence, mainly linked to biomedical topics. And also here with us is Rosario Guerra, an archaeologist, forensic anthropologist, and also a PhD student here at Panacea.
Thank you, Sebastian. Thanks for the presentation and for the invitation. So I will share my screen if you allow me to do it. And as Sebastian has already introduced us, so we are several speakers, but the presentation is, let's say, a straight line. So we have agreed, we work together in the same institute as he mentioned. So we have a straight presentation. I will make the introduction to biological profiling, and then I will focus on the part of age at death estimation, and Pablo will move to the part of sex estimation. So here you have the title of my presentation, and this is the short outline. So I will first start making this link between, of course, I'm a computer scientist, so my experience, my area of expertise is just artificial intelligence, but we have been working together with forensic anthropologists in our university for more than 17 years. So I will make a short introduction to forensic human identification and to the link to the biological profile, that is the umbrella that is covering both the topics we are talking about today. Then I will move to the age at death assessment from the pubic symphysis, that is the bone that is mainly used. And then I will incorporate our proposal in order to use not only machine learning, but explainable machine learning in order to be able to get an interpretable system to implement TOTS age at death estimation method, that is the pioneer proposal to estimate the age of death from the pubic symphysis. And just some conclusions, that is actually one slide with the whole team. So this is a short summary of the main tasks that are usually performed within forensic anthropology for human identification, forensic identification. So the first idea here is that this kind of techniques can be applied both on the living and on the dead. And regardless the task you must solve, there are mainly 3 groups. The first one is profiling, biological profiling. And as you can see, here we have now a kind of a square saying that we will be talking about this. And this is always the first task in order to select the sample of candidates we are going to compare with. Then there is the group of techniques that makes the kind of individualization. So mainly the idea is to compare ante-mortem data with the post-mortem data, either from the living or from the dead. Well, post-mortem in the case of death, of course, but ante-mortem and the additional information of the person we want to identify. And finally, the decision-making to perform the specific identification. So we will move to some artificial intelligence application in order to automate tasks for biological profiling. The idea here is to try from a sample of candidates, is to try to estimate some of the parameters regarding those candidates in order to look for a small sample to compare with. So mainly biological profile estimation involves at least one or mainly several of these parameters: age at death in the case of the dead, age in the case of the living, sex, stature, and ancestry. And the idea is, as I said, to select, to reduce the sample of candidates in order to compare, to perform a later identification. So here you have some examples of each of these parameters. And as you have seen, there have been a kind of animation showing that sex estimation can be done with several bones. Pablo will let you know about this later. So I will focus on age estimation. First, as you can see, I've moved from human identification, forensic identification, then to biological profiling, then in biological profiling to one of those parameters for age estimation. And we are still talking about living and death. So age assessment is both for the living and for the dead. And the idea is that the kind of tasks are different depending, of course, if the candidates are living or dead, and depending on the final task, on the final decision we should make. So this is age estimation is a very important issue. For example, for the under or over 18 threshold, for several legal reasons, like pedophile, unfortunately, and for fundamental rights associated to border, to minas, and so on. In order, when somebody crosses a border and moves to a different country, it's important to know if it's a child or not, if he or she is a child or not, is under 18 for legal purposes. So in any case, regardless living or regardless death, there are different methods in order to estimate age. And they are always related to some bones. And it's mainly related, what the forensic anthropologist looks for and checks is the bone development and the bone degenerative processes. Some of them occur before, some of them occur later. So there is a trial to identify those processes in order to estimate, according to the development, according to the degeneration stage of the bone, to take the final decision. So here I finally move to the main focus of my part of the talk, that is age at death. So we are moving now to the dead people, that is the estimation of the age when a corpse was dead. And there are different bones that can be used for this task. And the main one, along the different studies and a long time, it's assumed that the most useful and most relatable bone to do this is the pubic symphysis. Here you have some of figures of our samples. Actually, there are pictures from real bones we have in the forensic anthropology lab, in the physical anthropology lab. And the idea is to try to estimate the subject's age at death from those stages that the pubic symphysis is going through. So first on the development, and then on the first stages of degeneration, and the latest stages of the degeneration along life. So the basic method is not the state-of-the-art method, but is the basic method, is the most classical method, is 1 century old. It was proposed by Tad in 1920, and it's called what we call a phase-based method. What does this mean? So this guy, this forensic anthropologist, Tad, proposes a kind of general procedure based on descriptions. The idea is that he identified several development and degenerative stages for these bones and classified them, assigned them to different age at death ranges. So here you have from the young people to the elderly people, and there are different stages that the bone is supposed to be going through. And as I said, it's a very general and unsystematic procedure. So the idea is that you, the forensic anthropologist, look at the bone, and by visual inspection, tries to match the bone he or she has in his hand with the description of the specific phase, of the specific state of the different bones. And as you can see, this stage, if this person classify the bone according to one of these phases, these 10 phases, then it's said that the age at death is between 25 and 26, or is between 45 and 50, or over 50. So at the end, they are not uniform. So some of them show very short ranges, and some of them show very long ranges. And as it was proposed 1 century ago, the life expectancy was lower by that time, and the last stage was just over 50. I'm currently 50, so I would be already included in this group, when now the life expectancy is definitely longer. So that was the pioneering proposal, and there are many different proposals, either changing the decision-making process, but based on the same bone and on some of the descriptions proposed by Tad. The most famous one was proposed by Saki and Brooks, 97, 86, 89, 90. More or less, this is the most extended method nowadays. What they did was to reduce those 10 phases by Tad to 6 different phases, and then they made a kind of from one of sample of male and female pubic bones, they made a kind of table in order to link each of these faces. If we identify by visual inspection that were in phase 2, the age range was estimated on the bones of this kind according to that sample. So people use exactly the same tables when assigning one bone to one of these faces in order to estimate the mean and the range of estimation for that face. So the idea for us was that this is a very complicated, we will see it in the next slide. This is a very complicated task for non-experienced forensic anthropologists. So we are lucky because we work with experts on age estimation, working with this bone and with some other bones. And you will see that we also have a large, let's say a big database. A big database means around 800 pubic symphyses. So that is very large and it's a very good collection. But for a machine learning method, it's not that impressive because usually artificial intelligence, machine learning is applied over very large databases. But our idea at the beginning was to try to assist the forensic anthropologists with two different goals. On the first hand, build an automatic or semi-automatic method able to take the decision in the same way that that method is doing. So a forensic anthropologist classifies some characteristics of the bones, that is provided to the system, and the system takes the decision on the face it's assigned, that bone is assigned to, on the age at death estimation. And the other thing is that we were talking about that generic procedure, very vague on description and so on. We want to systematize that and to express the knowledge in the form of rules. So we will have rules that can be understandable by the human experts in order to try to categorize the decision making. So we are systematizing that decision making, and we can also use that system to uncover new knowledge. So as we are providing more specific descriptions, then we can extract new knowledge in order to see why the method is working, why it's not working, are some of the variables not useful, or something like that. So that's the idea. This is the environment of our framework. So the problem is very complex, both from the forensic anthropology approach, viewpoint, in the sense that it's difficult, it's a visual inspection, and also from the machine learning approach, because as you have seen, public bone descriptions in Todd's procedure are very general. So we need expert, very experienced and skilled forensic anthropologists. From the machine learning viewpoint, it's a classification problem. So we got objects in the input to the system. Those objects are a bone, a pubic symphysis. We need to extract characteristics, and then we need to assign each of these bones to one of the 10 faces. And we want it to work properly, to not commit so many errors, not to fail on the assignment of the different faces. The problem is that this is not data that we can download, for example, from Twitter, and we can take thousands of data in order to apply the machine learning technique. So we have the bones, we have a good pubic bone collection, but it's small, as I said, it's very small for machine learning. And something we will see, and it's very important, is strongly imbalanced. Fortunately, people that is older are more akin to death than young people. So we will have definitely many more samples of pubic symphysis from all subjects than from young subjects. So at the end, this is very technical, but at the end, it's a very, very complex machine learning process. So here, I know it's pretty small, but try to summarize the whole description I will show you in a while. So the idea is that we started with 1,000 over 1,100 pubic bones from 500 individuals. So we have the left-hand side and the right-hand side, both of them can be used. And then we work with the forensic anthropologists to categorize, to systematize the description of those bones. Not the generic description, but characteristics, variables, traits of the bones, and possible values. And we provided that to a machine learning method, to some machine learning methods, and we checked it didn't work. It didn't work because we had so few samples, and the data set was strongly balanced. So many of them corresponding to phase 10, the majority. So the classifier simply says, say phase 10, and you will get a low error, but it's a very deceptive result. So at the end, what we applied was an oversampling. We tried to generate copies of this data in order to balance the data set, and then we went for a new machine learning approach, and it worked properly. You will see we will have a system with 34 rules describing the decision making to assign one pubic bone, one pubic symphysis to one of these 10 possible faces. The accuracy was pretty good. We will see it in a way. And then we use that final rule set in order to validate the system, to interact with the forensic anthropologists, to remove some rules they think couldn't be useful, and to learn from those rules some new knowledge. So we'll be quicker now. This is the sample we had. See, we worked with male subjects only, 637. The two sides, left and right laterality. We have all the antemortem data. So we know about, for example, problems with alcohol or drug consumption, making some of the samples specific, not very useful. And we work with some exclusion criteria in order to look for the best possible pubic symphysis, removing the bad conserved ones, and so on. And this was the distribution. And here you can see we have 279 on phase 10 and only 19 on phase 4. This is the imbalance we were mentioning. So then we want to work with the forensic anthropologists and try to objectivize and systematize all the generic task description that were just sentences. This pubic symphysis has ridges and has the bony nodule and blah, blah, blah. So they systematize it to 9 different variables with these values. And they also define an atlas. So that's so useful even for young forensic students, forensic identification students, forensic anthropologists, for example, for the master works, for the master degrees, because we have images of the different variables where you can see the part of the bone they should analyze, and descriptions in order to assign a value for each of these characteristics, each of these traits, in order the system can take a decision. So after labeling, after an expert, several experts actually label each of the data, we applied a machine learning method. So I'm not going too much into that. It's just to show you the kind of rules we are working with. We have rules like this one. If one of the variables is one value and another variable is this value and another variable is this or this, we can have several. For example, here, ventral margin is absent or partially formed, so it's at the beginning of the process. Then phase is assigned to be phase 5, between 27 and 30 years, and we have a weight showing the confidence of the rule. So we know, according to the machine learning process, which rules are much confidence than others. And our machine learning process is able to remove variables and to keep just the most important variables. So it doesn't use all the variables, because in those cases, rules could be many more complicated. So then we made the oversampling, I showed you. So we repeated some of the samples. We included it several times in the data set for the machine learning process in order to equilibrate, to balance the data set. And we ran different learning methods, random forest, deep neural networks. And we showed that in order to get explainable classifiers, we need a small number of rules. So we have some classical methods in machine learning, like random forest, with something like 1,000 rules. That's too many for a forensic anthropologist to understand what is happening in. So finally, we went with 35 rules. And we started with the expert validation. So instead of only trusting in the rule base that is learned from the data, we interact with the forensic expert in order they can put an eye on the rules and check if they are good or not. So we played with a traffic light process. So we asked them in order to tag each of the rules like green, yellow, or red. Green, the rule is okay. All the knowledge there is perfect. Yellow, the rule is good, but there is something weird. And red, this rule doesn't make any sense. After that, from the first 35 rules, 20 were green, 10 were yellow, and 4 were red. We were manually refining this 10 yellow, and some of them were pretty easy, that simply there were several values that were consecutive, and the rule took this, and not the medium value in the OR value. So at the end, the only thing we needed to do is to add this intermediate value because the machine learning method wasn't asked to do so. And the red rules were those obtained at the very latest stage of the learning process. So they were the less trustable rules. So after that interaction, we managed to get 34 rules. One was the default rule, that the one that is applied always if none of the other rules is applied. And we got 24 green rules and 4 yellow rules. So at the end, the forensic anthropologists were trusting in all those rules. And we could even ask them to check the yellow rules. And we found that 2 of them had a variable, dorsal plateau, present in a phase that is the 9th. And this trait was supposed to appear in young individuals and disappear after the 30s. So it doesn't make sense to be linked to the 45s. You can notice here that we are using the explainable natural reclassifier in order to take the decision. So what we found is that this trait was not properly defined by Todd in his original definitions. And the other nice thing is that we had rules 10 and 29 that were confident, but they were covering a few number of samples, 2 and 4, and they were just defined for abnormal pubes. So those pubes corresponding to people that had pathological alteration or habits. So after that, we got this decision matrix. This is the one from the 34 rules, and this is the one for 1,000 rules. And you can see we have the 10 phases, the inputs and the outputs, and you can see both of them are pretty similar in their classification, in the values. And we can even check the different measure of quality of accuracy in each of the phases. So at the end, the analysis of the system is pretty properly matching the state of the art in the literature. So we have optimal performance or very good performance for young individuals under 30. All those processes that are not degenerative are developmental. Usually, in those cases, it's easier to identify the age at death because we are on a growing up, on a maturing process. And then from phase 6 on, the age at death is underestimated. That is another classical approach in the area. And just to finish, 2 different things. The first one is that comparing with some other automatic approaches in the literature that are working either with less samples or are using multilinear regression with some other bones, combining not only pubic symphysis information, but some other bones, our method is completely competitive. It's even better with the state-of-the-art results. And the last thing is that it's not only a matter of automatizing the idea, and it's not only a matter of having this system that can help, that can support the forensic anthropologist. The other good thing is that we can get knowledge, extract knowledge from this explainable system. So for example, here you have, for the 34 rules, the number of times each variable is used, each pubic bone trait is used in each of the phases. So we can identify some knowledge we didn't have at the beginning in Todd's method, in Todd's description. There are some of the variables that are used along the whole age range. So this variable is used for both young and old people. This one is only used for old people. It's never used for young people. These 3 are used for young people, and this one is never used. So we have one of Todd's description that is actually not used by the system in order to take any decision. No use of dorsal margin. And finally, we also found that the banning audio, that is this piece that is here, was a trait that was discarded by Saki and Brooks in the 90s when they changed it, when then redefined Todd's method. They thought it was an inconsistent trait, but what we checked from this learning process, from this knowledge extraction process, is that this was useful, but it was useful at the beginning, at the early stages, not at the final stages. So as you can see, we have been able to extract the inner behavior, the inner operation mode of Todd's method. We have systematized it, and we can use this knowledge in order to design, this is our next goal, to design new age estimation method that won't use all the variables at the same time, but would segment and use some of the traits for young, some of the traits for all individuals, and then make a kind of hierarchical system to take a better decision process. And that's all from my side. I only wanted as a conclusion. Pablo will link with this slide later, just to show you that, of course, I'm telling you about this, but I'm just one person in the team, and there is a lot of people working on these issues on artificial intelligence application for forensic anthropologists in order to work with our group of forensic anthropologists and try to help them in their daily work. Thank you so much from my side.
So, well, thank you very much for the invitation. As Sebastian said, my name is Pablo Mesejo, and I'm a researcher and associate professor at the University of Granada, as well as co-founding partner and chief AI officer at Panacea Cooperative Research. And I'm here today to talk about sex estimation from photographs using deep learning techniques. I guess this talk will take 23, 24 minutes, something like that. I'll start making a brief introduction to neural networks and deep neural networks, because these are the main tools we use in the projects I'm going to describe later. So at least some background and the definition of some concepts in this regard, I think, is necessary. And later, I'll focus on deep neural networks in biological profile estimation, but focusing on subadult sex estimation from images of the ileum, that is, to estimate sex in children, and adult sex estimation from images of the humerus. But first of all, linking, as Oscar was saying before, linking with his last slide, I wanted also to share the faces and the names of the team. I consider the same as Oscar that all relevant progress has a collective component. I apologize in advance because there are many people that are not listed here. These are colleagues, collaborators, extremely talented people and friends. But in red, I have highlighted the people more related with the two specific projects and papers I'm going to present today. In particular, Raúl Fernández was a bachelor student in computer science who was the first author on the first project I'm going to describe. Javier Benema and David Peula were the main authors of the second project I'm going to describe. Javier Benema actually is a PhD student at the University of Granada and Panacea, and David Peula was a master student in forensic anthropology, and Javier Irurita is a friend, colleague, and worldwide recognized expert in biological profile estimation. We have been working together for 4 or 5 years. And two of the two projects I'm going to present today are, well, the product of the work with these people, and without them, this wouldn't be possible. Let's start with a brief introduction to neural networks and deep neural networks. What are artificial neural networks? They are a set of highly interconnected simple processing units that through a learning process solve a specific task. What is this? Let's see an example on the right. You have input units, the circles, the green circles, 4 input units. We have 5, in this particular architecture, 5 hidden units in blue, and 1 output unit in red. This could be a neural network for instance, predicting the price of an apartment. If you have 4 characteristics, in this case, 4 variables, 4 features, that could be the number of rooms, the energy consumption category, the postal code, and the number of square meters, you can input these 4 characteristics, these 4 features, and you will obtain an output. In this particular example, that will be the price of an apartment. Each one of these circles depicted here are a simple processing unit. That means, or implies, that they perform a very simple and basic operation that we will see that is just a dot product. If you are not familiar with this mathematical term, it's just the product of inputs with some weights, which are displayed here as the arrows between these different circles. There are weights between the green circles and the blue circles, and there are weights between the blue circles and the red circle, and these arrows represent weights. One weight is one real value number, one number that you need to adjust in order to solve a specific task through a learning process. We'll see this in the next minutes. Every one of these circles is a unit or an artificial neuron. What does an artificial neuron? Well, an artificial neuron is what you see here on the bottom right. Each one of these units, if you zoom in, if we perform a radiograph, X-rays over each one of these bullets, small circles, you will see this. This is called a perceptron. That maybe it sounds familiar to you. It was presented in 1958 by Frank Rosenblatt. And what's the main operation performed here? You have inputs, x1, x2. You have weights, w0, w1, w2. You perform the product of inputs and weights, the summation, and the output of this very simple operation goes through a nonlinear function, a nonlinearity. And y, in this case, will be the output. If we are talking about this neuron here, this unit here, this y will be the output propagated through this connection. Okay? These w's are the weights or learnable parameters. These are just basic concepts for you to more or less understand what is going on behind. And on the left, you can see a biological neuron with some dendrites that receive input signals. In the brain, you have the nucleus that combines, integrates all the information, and the axon terminals that are in charge of transmitting to subsequent neurons the processed and integrated signals. Originally, well, neural networks have a history of 80 years, more or less. And at the beginning, this biological inspiration was quite important. The hypothesis was, well, if something works well on the brain, let's assume that we can try to emulate and obtain a good behavior, a good performance in different tasks. Nowadays, this biological intuition is not that important, in the sense that artificial intelligence is more focused on engineering, on mathematics, on statistics. And if in order to obtain a good performance in a specific task, you need to go far away from the biological knowledge we have about the brain, you are going to do it without any kind of problem. So now that we have an intuition about what are artificial neural networks and what an artificial neuron is, what are deep neural networks? Deep neural networks are just neural networks with many hidden layers, with many of these simple units. Traditionally, in machine learning, you were using features extracted by a human expert. So a human engineer could analyze the problem, extract the features that he or she will consider more useful to solve a particular problem. And then once you have this vector of characteristics, you will pass that through a classifier in the case of a classification problem, or to a regressor in case of a regression problem, or if you are working in an unsupervised setting, a clustering algorithm, or whatever. This was the traditional machine learning approach until 2012. But then deep learning appeared, and this is based on combining, well, one of the elements, the essential elements of deep learning algorithms is that they combine feature extraction and classification. So the characteristics, the variables you consider relevant, you don't need a human expert anymore. Is a deep network the one in charge of selecting what are the characteristics, the features that are relevant. And then also automatically it's going to perform the classification based on those features. The question now is, how do they learn? Well, by showing them many examples and improving progressively. I'm not going to enter into the mathematical details because are not necessary to understand the two projects I'm going to talk about. But the main idea is that if your network is receiving pictures of cats and dogs in order to classify an input image between dog, and cat, if you introduce a cat and your prediction is cat, you are performing a correct classification. So you don't need to modify your weights. Remember, the free coefficients, the parameters, the variables you have here that you want to tune in order to minimize your error. But in case you say that a cat is a dog, you are making a mistake. So your weights are going to be slightly modified in a way that next time your probability of making a mistake is smaller, right? So weights are automatically modified to minimize this prediction error. The most common scenario is supervised learning. This is the scenario we are dealing with in the two projects I'm going to talk about. And in the supervised learning setting, you have examples and you have the desired output. That means the correct class. You have the label. In this slide, you can see pictures of cats and dogs, and you have the desired output. Once you have trained your network, that means that you have learned the suitable parameters of your network, then you can see a new image, in this case, Puss in Boots, and say, well, this is a cat, this is a dog, what is it? I don't know if this is controversial or not, but I will say that in the long history of artificial intelligence, deep learning represents the most successful family of techniques. This could be discussed, but I think there are some empirical evidence to support that. They have obtained unparalleled performance on object recognition in images, on reinforcement learning in games, the very same techniques, the principles I've shown now, and that you already know. They are the fundamentals of deep learning even nowadays. After that, everything is to build upon those principles. And you can change the activation function, you can change the topology of your network, etc. But all these results I'm showing now are the product of applying some deep learning technique. So reinforcement learning in games, even winning the world champion at Go, style transfer, so deep neural networks are able to transfer the style of different paintings and artists to a particular picture, like in this case, at the label as A, at the top left of this slide, image coloring, or even image in painting. So if you have a seriously damaged image, you can, well, the deep learning techniques are able to reconstruct these images with missing parts. Image captioning, given an input image, deep learning techniques are able to provide captions describing the content of the input images, or even image synthesis. That is, generate completely artificial images from training data. So the question now, all this introduction is, you could be questioning yourself, well, what is this? Why are you telling me this? Because now the question is, why not applying these techniques, these artificial intelligence techniques, to forensic anthropology, and in particular, biological profile estimation, and even more specifically in sex estimation? Well, this is what we are doing in these two projects. The first one, well, both are related with biological profile estimation. I'm not going to talk about this because Oscar did a great job describing what biological profile estimation is, just to highlight or recall the idea that this is a fundamental step to reduce the possible candidates range during the identification process. So this is very useful for filtering. But the first project I want to talk about is sex estimation in children from photographs of the ileum. Main idea here, this is an extremely difficult problem. Extremely difficult problem. Why? Because the sexual dimorphisms are minimal since the differences begin to appear at puberty. So we knew in advance that this was an extremely difficult task. We use human pelvis, and in particular the ileum, highlighted in light blue in this slide. And you can see on the right paradigmatic examples of the images we were using to train, validate, and test our models. Males on the left, females on the right, and these are the kind of images we are working with. Well, the results and all the research performed by us has been published in International Journal of Legal Medicine in the reference you have at the bottom of this slide. The data set. Importantly, as you know, I don't know how familiar you are with computer science or machine learning in particular, but even, for instance, if you try to predict random noise, you can apply machine learning or deep learning. Deep learning is just a branch, it's just a subfield of machine learning. So maybe the results are going to be, well, we know how are going to be the results, but you can apply machine learning. Even if you have a closed form mathematical expression for a particular task, you can apply machine learning. It doesn't make sense, but you can. But if you don't have data, you cannot apply machine learning. This is the core of machine learning. So in this case, our data set contains 135 photographs of the ileum, 83 male, 52 female photographs, like the one you can see on this slide. They are taken from the collection of the Forensic Anthropology Lab of the University of Granada. And the pipeline we follow is the classical one in machine learning. No mystery here. We have training data, we have our learning algorithm. Once we have trained our machine, we can introduce new input data not seen during training, and we can try to perform a prediction. Human experts look for certain morphological features, but the neural network will look for its own discriminative patterns. This is important because, for example, in the case of subadult sex estimation using the ileum, forensic anthropologists have used the angle of the greater sciatic notch, or the arc criterion, or the curvature of the iliac crest, or the depth of greater sciatic notch. In fact, this is highlighted in red because in this paper, if I remember correctly, they conclude that this is the most discriminative morphological feature to classify between male and female in subadults. But keep in mind that the neural network will look for its own characteristics, its own features that may be the same or different. Now comes the very important question of how to choose your neural network architecture and how to train your network. If you are not familiar with these concepts, the third advices I'm going to give you, I like for you to take them as take-home messages, right? This talk, as you can see, is quite, it's a dissemination talk. I'd like that these three advices, general advices, could be useful for you. So the first one is not original, it's not from me, it's by André Karpathy, but I fully agree, is don't be a hero. Simply find the most related paper and copy-paste their simplest architecture that achieves good performance. For instance, if you are classifying images, don't be a hero and just copy-paste a ResNet 50 for your first run. This implies that, you know, nowadays, many teams and people are working on deep learning. You have many architectures available online. My advice is test or try with a well-known, well-established, consolidated, well-tested architecture that is already available and that you don't have to implement it. In our case, we use that with VGG16 and ResNet 50. Second advice, start from some pre-trained architecture. That means you have one neural network that has already been trained. You know the weights, you have the weights. So this neural network can do something. It's not random, its behavior is not random. And apply transfer learning strategies, that is fine-tuning. So you have already the weights, you can train a little bit with your data. And apply data augmentation. Data augmentation means that usually you have few data. What you are going to do is to perform some random modifications on your data, so your data set becomes bigger. That's all. The third advice is don't forget about more traditional classic techniques, because in some cases they can be good enough. So we tested with histogram of oriented gradients, which are features, quite conventional features in the computer vision community, plus support vector machines, random forest, and AdaBoost that in case you are familiar with machine learning, this could be interesting for you. Data augmentation, we tried with translation, rotation, brightness, random modification. The best results in any case were not with data augmentation. As experimental validation protocol, we use 5-fold cross-validation, and we just follow our 3 advices, and we use already consolidated neural networks, pre-trained on ImageNet, and just fine-tune the last layers. Just to make it quick, the results we obtained, you can see them here. 59% of accuracy using our best deep learning model. One could say, wow, but what is this? This is garbage, right? Well, not exactly, because look at the expert image observation, 61%. What are the conclusions we can get from here? First, deep learning is quite close to the expert prediction. In any case, none of them are quite good. And this shows the actual difficulty with this problem, 61% with a trained expert anthropologist looking at the same images. More conclusions. Well, to the best of our knowledge, this was the first automatic approach for sex estimation in subadults from images of the ileum. Deep learning in this particular task beats classical machine learning. These are just preliminary results, far from being useful in a real application case, but close to the ones yielded by a human expert. There's still margin for improvement. There are many technical details that could be tested and improved. But in any case, this is a very challenging problem. Never forget that. If we move to the second and last project, the same goal as before, but using the humerus to estimate sex in adult individuals. And now, well, first of all, I apologize because I'm not a forensic anthropologist, so maybe I could be maybe not accurate enough. But as far as I know, the pelvis and the skull, these anatomical districts are the most commonly employed for adult sex estimation. But what happens if you don't have pelvis or a skull, or if the remains you have access to don't include pelvis or skull? Well, you can use also long bones. The humerus is a long bone, is resistant, shows sexual dimorphisms. And the type of images we are using in this case are the ones you can see on the right, males on the left, females on the right. And this is the acquisition protocol we follow, right? All these research and conclusions you can access, you have access to it on this publication published very recently at Neural Computing and Applications. And the data set in this case includes 401 photographs of the right posterior humerus, 213 male, 188 female, again from the Forensic Anthropology Lab of the University of Granada. Methods, the same philosophy as before. We use conventional, well-established deep learning classification networks, VGG16 and ResNet50. We also try with traditional approaches like histogram of oriented gradients, support vector machines, random forest, and logistic regression. And we employ 5-fold cross-validation as experimental validation protocol. Again, data augmentation, even if we tested it, like in the previous application, did not show any particular benefit. And again, we follow the 3 advices I gave you before, pre-training on ImageNet and fine-tuning of the last layers of our networks. Results, just to make it quick and direct. Human expert, 83.33%, following the visual method proposed in Rogers in 1999. Geometric morphometrics, semi-automatic state-of-the-art technique, 75%. And our method, 91%. Outperforming clearly even human expert exploration and geometric morphometrics. A very interesting aspect is related with what Oscar was saying before about explainable artificial intelligence. We are not only interested in performing an accurate prediction, but on trying to understand and explain why the neural network is providing that prediction. So the question we pose is, what is the neural network paying attention to when making the prediction? And here you can see this coarse localization maps highlighting the important regions in the input image for predicting the class. We can verify even that the work is, the method is doing something relevant, because it's also focusing on the regions that are also important for human experts. But more importantly, we have found a possible new discriminant region, because in those cases where the human was wrong, but our technique was right, we visualized the activation maps and we found another anatomical structure or region where the neural network was focusing in order to obtain that prediction. So keep in mind that all these techniques not only allow the reproduction of human behavior, automating complex or tedious tasks, but also the generation of new knowledge, as you have also seen in Oscar Cordon's talk. So just to finish, my last slide, conclusions. Well, to the best of our knowledge, again, this was the first automatic approach for sex estimation in adults from images of the humerus. Deep learning, again, beats classical machine learning approaches in this particular task. In this case, remarkable results, 91% accuracy, outperforming state-of-the-art and human expert, even if we still have a margin for improvement, because we hypothesize that adding the centroid size can further improve the results obtained. We have seen in literature that up to 7 percentage points in geometric morphometrics can improve if you introduce the centroid size. And finally, well, we have an online application on skeleton ID. So I invite you to go to this URL, because we provide the prediction and a probability related to how certain the network is about the provided output. And this is everything from my side. Thank you for listening.
Well, thank you very much, Pablo, and also thank you, Oscar. I think you've given us great insight into the work that you've been leading in the last years. And now I will be having the honor to show everyone how this integrates into Skeleton ID. Well, first of all, I didn't even introduce myself. Well, you already did, Sebastian, but I'm Rosario. I'm PhD student in the University of Granada, and I am an anthropologist in Panacea. And we are developing, for those who may not know, software Skeleton ID for human identification, and it provides support for multiple techniques. Among them, we will be having biological support for biological profile estimation in the version to log into Skeleton ID to show you these latest developments that are coming both from the algorithms developed by researchers at the University of Granada and also researchers at Panacea. So what you're seeing right now is the core of Skeleton ID, and this is our database. And if I click on one of my case files, I will have linked to it both antemortem and the postmortem information on cases. So I will just open one postmortem case so that I can show you. And in the information of the body, we have a biological profile section where we can include different estimations. So I will add an estimation. Right now, these are the methods that are currently supported. So you can see, for example, Morel discriminant functions estimations that allow us to estimate the sex of an individual. So once I select it, I have the different characteristics and measurements that I would have to take on the bone. So I will input them. I have some notes here. The cotylopubic width, for example, would be 28, greater sciatic notch height, and the coxal length, and the ischium post-acetabular length. So now that I have these measurements, I will just click on estimate, and it will give me the estimation for sex. In this case, it would be a man with a 97% of possibility, and then probability, sorry. I will just very briefly show another method that we can we can show, for example, the Mending's method for age estimation. That this is a method, for those that don't know, that uses the transparency of the root of the tooth to estimate age. So with the measurements that I have here, I would just input them and estimate, and it would give me an estimate of the age. And then here we would have the estimation results. So now I just estimated the sex and the age. And even though the software is giving us that those things based on the methods that we are using, we can also have our own expert decision based on all the results from different methods that we get. And well, we are constantly adding and reviewing and validating new methods to include estimations, as both Pablo and Oscar have been explaining. Some are yet not available in the software, but some you can also check right now in the Skeleton ID website. If you go to the resources page in research, you can see methods for, as I was saying, biological profile estimation, but we also have some other methods. For example, this one to estimate subject to camera distance. This is very relevant for identification techniques such as craniofacial superimposition or forensic facial comparison. If you're interested, I recommend you go to our page and check it out. And for example, I will just very briefly show you how the sex estimation from the humerus method is working right now. That's the one that Pablo Mesejo just explained. So here in our webpage, we can go to the estimate sex, and in here I would have to just add my name and email and select a photograph. In this case, I will select one that has a broken humerus, so you can see that it also works with an image of bone that is not in perfect conditions. And this is the result that we would get.
Well, thank you so much for coming, everybody. Thank you, Oscar, Pablo, y Rosario, for presenting today. I would like to mention that we're going to have our next event at the end of January. We'll provide information as usual on our webpage. And I think that's all. Merry Christmas to everyone. And we see you next year.